Hello. So we'll talk about the different types of tissue in the body, and we'll spend more time on some than the others. While I do believe, obviously, all four are important. Without them, we wouldn't have a living body. They all play a critical role, but some of them we have more influences on than others, more direct influences on than others, particularly with asana, which is a lot of what we're going to be talking about as we get into the different poses and their influence on things like muscle and connective tissue. But realize that all four tissue types can be affected by yoga, and from things like pranayama and meditation to asana, all influence all of the tissue types in one way or another, some less obvious than others, but we can have a direct and indirect effect on all the tissue types with our yoga practice. So the four tissue types are connective tissue, epithelial tissue, muscle tissue, and nervous tissue. Everything in our body is made of one of those forms of tissue or another. Epithelial tissue is the linings of structures, particularly some of our organs, things like our trachea, our respiratory tract, our bronchi, our alveoli, the sort of terminal little sacs where gas exchange takes place. Excuse me. Our intestines, various organs in our body. So nervous tissue. When we think of nervous tissue, we think of the cells of the nervous tissue, and that the thing that comes to mind for most all of us, and the one that we think of most often, is the neurons, and that is this is a drawing of a single neuron, and all neurons have certain things in common: cell bodies, axons. They have dendrites and various things, so that connect on both sides. So the cell body can be anywhere along the nerve. This just happens to show it on one end. It can be on one end, it can be in the middle, it can be off a little sort of sidetrack, something like that. But these sort of little finger-like projections on the end is where these nerves communicate with other nerves and or with things like muscle or glands, stuff that they're trying to influence. But in addition to the nerve cells themselves, or the neurons, there's these other cells called neuroglia, and there's several types of those, and the names of which are not super important for what we're going to be doing. Very interesting, but not super important. We used to think that those neuroglia just sort of had a sort of very, very much a support role. While they certainly are supportive, and we're finding out now that they probably play a much larger role than we once thought, greatly influencing lots of the functionings of many systems in our body. So the sort of cells of our nervous tissue are the neurons and the neuroglia, and they work in conjunction with each other to have some effect on our body. So if you think about simplifying our nervous system, I'll break it down into sort of three major components. The first of which is sensory input. So we get some input from outside that we bring in so that we have some data or some information about which to make decisions. So the sort of integrating part of this, or prediction part of this, is that this sensory input comes in and does one of two things. We match the input that comes in with what our prediction was with what was going to happen. So, for instance, as we walk along, we are not solely walking based on the information we get from where our foot strikes, but from very, very subtle predictions that our body makes, from how walking has gone before, from what we see, what we hear, and then ultimately what we feel as we walk along, and we're making predictions about where our feet are going to strike the ground, what's going to happen when they strike the ground, what the ground is going to feel like. And when what our brain and our central nervous system does to make sure that we're dealing with the world correctly is that it matches up our prediction with what actually is happening, and we only deal with that difference, so that we don't have to deal with tons and tons of difference when we make slight adjustments and slight changes. And then from that integration of predictive and actual occurrences, we have some kind of output, some kind of motor output. So the system decides, okay, I need to contract muscles, okay, I need to release hormones, I need to do something, or I need to relax muscles perhaps, to have a better interaction with the environment. So if we think about the nervous system functioning in that way, input, matching that input with predictions, integrating it together, and then forming some output. Let's think about now the sort of geography or the anatomy or the architecture with which it does that. So one of the ways to do that is to break it down into two various systems. I guess you could call them systems. They are called systems, but really it's based on their location. And that is the central nervous system, that would be the brain and the spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, and that's everything that comes out of one of those two places, right? So we have nerves that leave the brain and the brainstem and do things in the face, for example, vision and hearing and touch around our face. And we have things coming out of the spinal cord, going out into our trunk, into our arms, into our legs, and telling muscles out there what they would like done, and also bringing back information from out there, things, some of the sensations that we might bring back in. So we can also break the system down into two, somatic and autonomic, and we can do that because they sort of function very differently. They have different sort of locations, and they have different sort of functions. So the somatic system is probably the system that most of us think about when we think about the nervous system. It's our brain telling our muscles what to do. We feel hot, we feel cold, we feel a pinch, and there's some sort of response to that. And so really the effector, the output from the central nervous system in the somatic system is really to muscles. It really is to what are called skeletal muscles. And then we have the autonomic nervous system, and that's the system that really isn't under conscious control, right? Somatic is more conscious. We understand what's going on. We can certainly modify it or change it. It's very much under our control. The autonomic nervous system, autonomic, more like automatic, is sort of subconscious. I wouldn't say we don't have the ability to control it to some degree, but we certainly do not have the ability to control it nearly as fully as we do the somatic system. So for example, we are able to hold our breath, but we're not able to hold our breath indefinitely. We are able to do things like slow our heart rate down with meditations and breathing, and over the long haul by activities that we do. If we run every day, our heart rate will slow down, things like that. We have the ability to modify it, but we don't have great control over it, not like we do our muscles, where we would go to pick something up or lift something heavy. With our somatic system, the muscles that the autonomic system controls are not nearly as under our control. The muscles of the output organs of the autonomic nervous system are muscles as well, but different muscles, not skeletal muscles like the somatic system, but smooth muscle and cardiac muscle. And smooth muscle is really in the linings of various organs like our blood vessels and our gut, things like that. Cardiac muscle is strictly our heart. In addition to that, there is output and input from things like glands and, interestingly enough, fat cells, adipocytes. So if we take a little stroll down the somatic nervous system a little more, we get input, afferent input from sensations, and the sensations that we get input from in our somatic system are things like vision, hearing, taste, smell, right? We're all used to that. Touch, nociception, or pain. It's called pain. It's not exactly correct, but it's close enough for our purposes. It's really more accurate to say nociception. Pain is an output, really, not an input, but we can leave it there for now. And temperature, is something warm, is something cold. And finally is proprioception. And proprioception is where is our body in space. So if for example, I had you close your eyes and I took your left arm and I put it in a certain position, say like a goalpost position, and I said, okay, put your right arm in the same position as your left arm is now, you would be able to come pretty close to that, or most of us can, that have intact proprioception systems. Another thing that you can do is take your index finger of your right thumb and bring it as close as you can to your nose without touching it. So in other words, don't touch it and then just pull it away, but get as close as you can to your nose without actually touching your nose. And then when you think you're there, then go ahead and touch it and see how close you've come. You've come pretty gosh darn close to it just through proprioception and understanding where your body is in space, and that again is part of the somatic nervous system. And the output system, like I said, are particular type of muscles, the skeletal muscles, and those are muscles like our biceps, our hamstrings, right? Our abdominal muscles, our pectoral muscles, our glutes, right? So that's the output to the somatic system. So the somatic system is really interested in movement when it comes to an output. So we bring things in afferently, and efferently, or output, we're looking for some action, and that action is almost always movement, or actually a lack of movement. The output might be, hey, turn off, don't do that anymore. So it has something to do with our muscles and our movement, or lack of movement, that the somatic system deals with.